Welcome back, everyone. Today, we're unpacking a truly fascinating explainer based on the writings of deiform Buddha, drawn from Li Weidong's work, Humanity Was Once Destroyed. Okay, let's dive into this because we're exploring a mystery that has puzzled scientists and philosophers forever. Does the human mind exist entirely independently of the physical brain? The source material we're looking at today presents some incredibly provocative evidence that challenges the very foundation of modern science.
So, where does the human mind actually come from? That is the fundamental question, right? For centuries, our standard scientific assumption has been pretty straightforward. The physical brain generates the conscious mind. It's just basic cause and effect. But the author of our source text takes us on a really methodical journey to question that basic premise. They suggest that if we actually look closely at the biological data, unexplained medical anomalies, and some pretty extreme psychological experiments, the evidence might point to a completely different and honestly rather astonishing conclusion.
Section 1. The Origins of Consciousness and Debunking Biology. Now, to solve any mystery, we first have to eliminate the prime suspect. And in this case, that suspect is human biology. Initially, scientists tried to explain our intelligence by comparing brain volume to overall body weight. But now what's really interesting about this is, if the brain-to-body weight ratio actually dictated the richness of the mind, humans wouldn't be at the top of the food chain. We sit at a ratio of 1 to 38. But look at white mice, gibbons, and even sparrows. They all have better brain-to-body weight ratios than we do. Yet last time I checked, they aren't composing symphonies or building skyscrapers. So when that didn't work, scientists shifted their focus to the frontal lobe, the supposed seat of creative thinking. But the source points to magnetic resonance imaging studies from researchers at the University of Iowa. They measured primate brains and found something completely shocking. A gorilla's frontal lobe takes up 31.7% of its brain. A chimpanzee's is 36.1%, and a human's 36.8%. Basically, our frontal lobe is only 0.7% larger than a chimp's. That microscopic fraction totally fails to explain the vast, incomprehensible leap in human intelligence and consciousness. The text goes on to list a few other biological dead ends, too. For instance, smaller animals actually have significantly denser brain cells than humans. Mice have nearly 10 times the brain cell density we do. No way, right? And what about brain convolutions, those little wrinkles that supposedly make us smart? Well, it turns out oceanic dolphins have just as many, if not more, brain convolutions than humans do. The author uses all this data to basically argue that biology alone simply does not hold the answer to where our mind comes from.
Section 2. Unexplained medical anomalies.
Having thrown some serious doubt on the biological argument, the source then highlights a series of documented medical case studies that utterly defy modern brain science. First, there's this tragic but totally fascinating case from Virginia of a baby born with a cranial cavity filled almost entirely with water, effectively lacking a brain altogether. Yet the baby showed awareness, laughed at TV programs, and actually lived for 5 years. Then there's a pretty gruesome East German accident where a severed head maintained normal electronic brain signals for 76 hours and even communicated by blinking. Or how about the 1960 Kunming patient who had half his brain removed, yet lived and worked completely normally? But perhaps the most incredible case the author presents is about a mathematics student at the University of Sheffield in England. This student was exceptional, high IQ, aced his university exams, perfectly well-adjusted, and really well-liked by his peers. To anyone looking at him, he was just a brilliant, ordinary young guy. But a routine medical examination involving a CT scan by neurology expert Professor John Lorber revealed a deeply shocking secret. The scan revealed that this brilliant student essentially had no brain. So the crucial point is, his cerebrocortex was a mere 0.3 millimeters thick. To put that into perspective, a normal human cortex is about 4.5 millimeters thick. The rest of his skull was literally just filled with cerebral spinal fluid. Scientists and doctors were left completely astonished, entirely unable to explain where the student's high intelligence was actually coming from. All of these anomalies lead the author to a really pivotal conclusion. All evidence seems to suggest that the human mind likely exists independently of the physical body. From here, the narrative shifts completely. If the mind doesn't live inside the biological mechanics of the brain, what exactly is it? And maybe more importantly, how much power does this independent mind have over our physical forms? Section 3. Extreme Psychological Experiments.
To answer that, the author introduces a series of, well, somewhat macabre psychological experiments. Take this one, for example. A subject is forced to watch what they believe is a torture session involving a red-hot coin. Then, the subject is blindfolded, and the experimenter places a coin on the subject's arm. The subject screams in agony, and miraculously, a real coin-sized third-degree burn develops on their skin. But here's the twist. The coin placed on the subject was completely harmless. It was just slightly above room temperature. The author uses this to argue that the physical body simply reacted to the mind's absolute belief. The mind expected a severe burn, and so it forced the physical body to create one. Absolutely wild, right? The text details another intense mini-narrative, and this one actually ends in tragedy. As a university prank, students tied their friend in a bag and left him on an abandoned railway track. When a train roared past on a parallel, totally separate track, the ground shook, and the noise was deafening. Tragically, the friend on the abandoned track died. Yet the subsequent autopsy revealed absolutely zero physical trauma or internal damage. He wasn't even touched by the train. This sparked a massive debate among psychologists. What actually killed him?
The psychologist's explanation for the train track death is a concept known as mental suicide. The text defines this as the mind's ability to subconsciously and forcibly end its own physical life when confronted with an utterly hopeless situation. The student in the bag felt the vibration, heard the noise, and genuinely believed he was about to be crushed. Out of sheer terror and the absolute belief of impending doom, his mind literally shut his body down before the perceived impact could even occur. To back this up, the text connects the train prank to a psychological animal experiment conducted by a researcher named Kratz. Kratz took a mouse, which is normally a very strong swimmer, and removed its whiskers. Now, whiskers are a mouse's primary sensory tool for navigation. When dropped into a pool, the whiskerless mouse could no longer sense its surroundings. It immediately panicked, believed it was hopelessly trapped, and drowned instantly, sinking right to the bottom without even trying to swim. The author notes that the mouse experienced mental suicide. It killed itself with despair before the water ever did. And this brilliantly illustrates the exact same terrifying principle in humans, referencing a 1934 experiment in New Delhi. A condemned criminal was told he'd be executed by having his blood drained. He was blindfolded, given a harmless, superficial scratch, and then forced to listen to water dripping into a metal basin, mimicking the sound of his own bleeding. The criminal actually grew pale, his breathing weakened, and he died, looking exactly as if he had lost all his blood. The mind killed the body purely through the astonishing power of belief. The source further cements this argument by reviewing anomalies found in hypnosis. In one test, a deeply hypnotized subject drank plain water but was told it was sugary syrup. Miraculously, their physical blood sugar levels spiked despite absolutely no sugar entering their digestive system. In another test, a post-hypnotic suggestion caused a subject to unconsciously throw a pen out a window hours later, completely unaware of why they even did it. These instances suggest an independent mind is secretly governing our physical actions, and even our biochemistry. The author also points to a 1966 biological finding. When doctors stimulated a specific area of the brain with electrodes, they observed a strict half-second delay before the body reacted. The author argues that if consciousness and the brain were exactly the same biological entity, the stimulation and reaction should be absolutely simultaneous. This 0.5-second lag is presented as mechanical proof that consciousness is independent, sort of acting upon the brain like an operator using a machine. Section 4. The independent soul theory. So, having presented biological dead ends, medical anomalies, and those wild psychological phenomena, the text explores the grand philosophical and scientific conclusions we might actually draw from a mind that exists apart from the body. This brings us back to a concept introduced at the very beginning of the text by a figure referred to as deiform Buddha, the idea of self-directed death. This is the concept that humans naturally possess the ability to control their own life and death completely through the power of the mind. According to the text, once a person resolves their earthly attachments, they can simply decide the exact moment to leave the human world. It frames the extreme psychological deaths we just explored as uncontrolled, terrifying versions of this exact same innate mental power. The author points out that while modern science might view these instances as startling anomalies, ancient religions have accepted them as fact for millennia. The text specifically aligns these modern scientific experiments with Taoism's concept of the three treasures and Buddhism's Buddha nature. In these traditions, the physical body is viewed as merely a vessel or a furnace for cultivation, and the true, evolved consciousness, the soul, is meant to exercise ultimate control over the physical form. But it's not just ancient philosophers making these leaps. Let's move to and see how this builds into modern scientific theory. The author cites the 1978 Nobel Prize-winning neurophysiologist John Eccles. After a lifetime of brain research, Eccles actually proposed the self-aware mind theory. He posited that the brain is not the mind at all. It's simply a material tool used by a non-material self that is completely independent. To summarize the ultimate argument of the source material, we look to this really powerful quote from Nobel laureate John Eccles himself. Each of us has had non-material thinking. This soul endows us with human characteristics. The non-material self continues to exist after the material brain dies. The text argues that the concept of mind-body separation isn't just some absurd religious superstition, but a scientific reality that we are only just beginning to rediscover. We've seen the medical anomalies, the mind-bending experiments, and the theories of Nobel laureates. The source text makes a compelling, structured case that your body is merely a tool operated by an independent, powerful force, which leaves us with this final, profound question. If the mind truly exists independently of the brain, what are the true limits of your own consciousness? It's definitely something fascinating to think about as you go about your day. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and keep learning.